Hello, everyone. I'm Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and I'm joined this week by Dennis Hall, our Bulletin Editor. Hello, Dennis.
Hello, Helen.
Now, this is a special week as we are launching the Code of Practice on Good Governance for Local Authority Statutory Officers. Dennis.
Of course, Helen, this is the code that was first presented at our June Spring Conference. I was there. And of course, it's about to be launched in full form tomorrow. Now, of course, this is an important product of collaboration by all the key players that undoubtedly will serve to effectively support the interests of the statutory officers and, of course, the other range of officers who nowadays work in governance in local authorities. But Helen, can you tell us what precisely is happening this week?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've revised the code since we soft launched at the Spring Conference with some tweaks and editorial. And when I say we, I mean LLG, SOLACE and CIPFA, and we did this with support and consultation from Philip McCourt from Bevan Britain, and indeed actually he supported us through the entire process. So tomorrow it will be published to the membership of all those organisations. And it's important to say, unlike other documents we might produce, neither CIPFA SOLACE or LLG are holding this behind any paywall. It's going to be made available for everyone because we need everyone to know about it, read it, and take it on board the changes required to give effect to the context at their local authorities. And this includes not just the senior leadership team, but heads of service, team leaders and officers, as well, of course, as councillors. And it's really going to help staff to understand, certainly from LLG's perspective, the role of the monitoring officer, what it does and why it's important. And I think the MO role is perhaps the least understood generally from the three statutory officers of the Golden Triangle. So, you know, we're incredibly proud of this document, and I'll actually give a shout out here to Deborah, our CEO, for her work, and also to Helen Bradley, our national lead for MO and governance. So throughout the summer, I will be holding interviews with CIPFA, SOLACE and Philip McCourt individually to look at different aspects of the code from the different officer viewpoints. And obviously, Helen will be joining me as well for an MO-focused discussion. So look out for those vlogs. And if you're away somewhere lovely on holidays, you can catch those up on your return. They're going to be on our website to view on demand. Looking forward to the autumn, we are setting up a panel webinar to discuss the code and also to identify whether there are any early indications of proactive change in the sector. And then we will look to gather data to ascertain the extent to which the code might be working and essentially plan to run a year-long focus really on this code. It's all proactive stuff, Dennis.
Indeed it is. I'm looking forward to it very much, Helen. So let's take a look at the code itself. The code provides advice and sets expectations for local government's three highest profile statutory roles: the head of the paid service, chief executive in other words, the chief finance officer, and of course the monitoring officer. And the aim of the code is to enable them to effectively work together in what is known as the Golden Triangle, as you mentioned, Helen, to best advise their authority, implement decisions, and also to help achieve good outcomes for their authorities. CIPFA, SOLACE, and LLG, as you mentioned, Helen, have all developed the code, and its format is specifically designed as a supportive statement of how the key relationship between those statutory officers should work in practice.
Well, the code is anchored around the 7 standards of the Golden Triangle alongside more direct requirements associated with each standard. Now, the standards are intended to provide guidance to the three officers concerned, explain the roles more clearly to those operating closely with those statutory officers, and provide context conversations about the roles, the requirements and actions to be taken. But as I've said, this is the code that everybody who's working in a local authority should be looking at. So I think it's important just to run through what the 7 standards of the Golden Triangle are as stated within the code. This is to understand governance, to understand roles and responsibilities, to act wisely, which is the duty of inquiry and the exercise of statutory functions, to lead ethically, and this is, of course, reverting back to the 7 principles of public life, to act effectively, this is robustness in working arrangements, to resource the roles, let's have the tools to do the job, to build resilience, so this is talking about deputies and development and succession, to deliver sound decision making, which of course, this is the outcome of good governance. So what do you make of those 7 standards there?
I think all of those standards taken together are very significant to have set out in the statement, as we've seen. But I was especially interested in the leading ethically standard that you mentioned, given that the new Labour government, as you know, has set itself a commitment to selflessness and public service. In other words, leadership from monitoring officers is going to be significant. The code itself says theirs is a particular responsibility for leadership in governance, and in exercising that responsibility, they should model their behaviour for the rest of the organisation, should lead by example in following the Nolan principles, and call out poor behaviour where they see it. In doing so, however, this does not in any way reduce the application of the Nolan principles or the responsibility to lead in the same manner for other senior officers, members, and those also involved in delivering public services. Now, the government could have said all of that, Helen, in some of the recent speeches that we've seen from the Prime Minister about the importance of ethics and the link to the delivery of public service. So I think the question now will be, to what extent are monitoring officers to be proactive in their leadership on ethics? I think that is a massive question that these standards and that particular standard raise for how monitoring officers ought to operate in practice. It sets the bar quite high. It's a proactive role, let's not forget. It's not a passive role.
That's right. Well, I mean, the role of MOs in difficult situations is really, for us at least, the central question, but actually it impacts across the whole governance of local authorities. So I think we should remind ourselves of 2 things. First, the new government is committed to robust financial rules that are unlikely to make available, new funding to meet the huge deficits in our sector. Second, the signs are there that councils may continue to fail because of financial pressures. And in that respect, the election result may not have changed things for some councils who are facing these acute financial pressures. Last January, analysis from leading business and financial advisor Grant Thornton UK found that the current financial outlook for local councils in England is alarming. And I think we know this. And they predict 40% of councils are at risk of financial failure over the next 5 years. And according to data from Grant Thornton's financial foresight tool, within the next 12 months alone, over 1 in 5 councils in England are at risk of financial failure. Without additional income or further spending cuts. So it's difficult to see where those spending cuts are going to come from, frankly. And this increases to 25% by the end of next year. So authorities are in a extremely precarious financial position, frankly. And previous analysis conducted by the firm 2 years ago, October 2022, that was where 1 in 6 councils were deemed to be at risk of running out of money within 12 months. I think it identifies that metropolitan and unitary councils are at the highest risk of financial failure this year, followed by London boroughs and district authorities. So, Dennis, what can MOs do about these issues?
Well, some massive questions there. But can I mention incidentally, Helen, because you mentioned the last Grant Thornton report in January, but in fact, they've updated this with a further report that was published last week, and it will be in this week's bulletin. But again, the outlook is still the same. More financial failures are expected within local authorities. But back to the question that you raised, for me, the main question for monitoring officers is whether the environment exists within their authorities, either because of the culture within that authority or the way in which decisions are made. Is the environment such that it encourages transparent scrutiny, particularly where the council faces difficult issues and pressures? Following the Post Office scandal inquiry, many commentators are saying that it is not sufficient for organisations to rely merely on the moral courage of single individuals, or the Golden Triangle in our case, whose roles charge them with responsibilities to act where things go wrong. So, for example, commentators are asking questions about the role of executive teams and the role and functions of chief executives, and whether they need to be reviewed also. Do they understand the professional rules that apply to solicitors, for example, when difficulties arise involving professional ethics? And here's the main question, because it raises the question of regulation. Should there be pathways to the regulators to enable reporting outside an organisation where things go wrong and where professional and ethical considerations actually arise? And of course, there is the question of protections, something LLG is particularly concerned about for monitoring officers. But the post office scandal, I think, demonstrates that many questions arise about the understanding of individuals in executive teams who rely on professional advice. I think the post office scandal raises some interesting questions. It demonstrates that many issues arise about the understanding of individuals in executive teams who rely on professional advice, and legal advice in particular. Do they understand the professional duties that apply to solicitors? Do they understand that it isn't a matter of the client always comes first? For me, that is the central question. And again, commentators are raising the issue about the elephant in the room, and that is about independence. Are the professional officers, the Golden Triangle, are they able to act in a truly independent manner, given that they're all employees?
I know.
This is the thing that will unravel in the coming months when new regulations will be brought out. The SRA are committed to doing something in relation to the legal aspects of the Golden Triangle, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, well, we will be sending them a copy of the code, and obviously they've produced their in-house guidance, haven't they? Now, some commentators say that it doesn't go far enough, but we will continue to work with the SRA, and I think there are transferable lessons from local government into the private in-house sector.
Yes.
That could definitely benefit. Yeah. So on that note, you can get coverage of many more items from the bulletin and by listening to the Grapevine podcast. So thank you for joining us. It's goodbye from me.
And from me too.